Morels aren't truly a mushroom, and a lot of times they're categorized or lumped in mushrooms. Mushrooms technically they have gills, and that's how they drop their spores. That's how they reproduce. Morels have little sacs in them. Each one of these, little compartments in here has spores, and they'll shoot 1 million spores an hour. This is the reproductive organ of an organism that you never see, that could be there for 50, 60, 70 years, and then there's a need for it to fruit. There is a method to their madness, and then they still have their own madness that you can't figure out. In 2011, and it was before 11, it started in 9, there was a morel data collection, and that disproved a lot of myths that we believe. There are, without a doubt, we can define 19 species in the United States. So symbiosis, so that's what we need to learn about morels. They live with a tree. Their main job is giving nutrients to a tree. They don't have chlorophyll, so they're not like a plant. They can't naturally just, dissolve their energy. So they directly absorb it through their cell walls. That's the roots of the trees, and they adhere to that. And then their roots go all out over the forest floor. The host tree has the sugars, the acids, the heavy minerals that mushroom, with its root system that's attached to the tree's root system, is breaking down and feeding that tree in exchange for sugar. So when the tree gets damaged, symbiosis is broken. That's why they fruit mushrooms often. I firmly believe that morels are symbiotic, but they're also saphoristic, that there's a point where when a tree's dead or dying, that the morel finishes off the tree. It takes the sugar it needs and it fruits massively. Mushrooms grow in their own food source, whatever that food source is. And as it goes with morels, their food source is sugar from, a lot of times, a dead cottonwood or a dead elm. And you'll find a mother lode. And then you'll go there one year and you're like, oh, there's 100 morels here, and then the next year there's only 20, and the next year there's only 2. It's because the sugar's gone. Morels just don't get up and move. They stay where they are. They'll fruit in the same spot, but they need that same, the same thing to happen. So their life cycle, when it is interrupted or in danger, that's when they fruit. They could go 50 years, morels could just sit there and they're like, you know what? There's no need for me to reproduce. My tree's really healthy. I'll just grow some roots this year. That's why you can find morels 100 yards away from maybe where there's even a tree, because they've grown out that far, and that's how far they're bringing in nutrients. And the sclerotum, it's the nutrient sac of the morel, and it's so far down on the ground, it sits there, and in the fall, when we get our fall rains, and it goes dormant, it lives with the trees, it goes dormant. And so it senses, it takes in its nutrients, and it wakes up in the spring, and it's like, everything's good with the tree. You know what? I'm just gonna grow some roots. Or it wakes up and it's like, something's wrong. Maybe there was a windstorm and a limb got broken. It's like, I might fruit 2 or 3 morels and try to bring in some more nutrients, offset what's going on, and my host tree is gonna do a lot better. Well, so it does it that year, and then the next year you go to that tree and that tree is dead, and then when that sclerotum wakes up, it's like, I'm gonna take all the energy I can, I'm gonna fruit 50 mushrooms. So that's the main nutrient body of a morel. It wakes up every spring, and if it doesn't have the moisture, it doesn't have the heat, it's too cold, whatever the reason is, it opts out, and it says, I'll wait till next year. I'll wait till the conditions are right, till I can germinate. Morels can be found anywhere, and the reason is they're symbiotic. There's a certain tree that they love, and that tree's gonna be somewhere. That's an elm tree, it's dead. All these mushrooms that you see out there, that came off that elm tree. That elm tree right there, all those mushrooms are attached to that tree. 25 years from now, when that tree grows up and dies, those mushrooms will be fruiting from those same spots. They won't go anywhere. There may be more of them because their spores have spread, but and there's more elm trees I can see in that forest. That's a first-year dead elm tree. That's the one I would walk to and expect to find mushrooms under. That tree there, I might look at it. You can see the bark's about gone. I'm like, I'm gonna walk around that tree and look. There may be 1 or 2 mushrooms, probably not. That tree there, I'd probably not go around. I mean, myself, I'd walk because I'm seeing other elms laying everywhere in there, and I'd go in that general area. But to me, that tree's gone enough that the morel's probably already been there and gone. Cottonwoods is another one of my favorite trees, and they're very prolific along the river and waterways. And cottonwood morels, they're different. A lot of times cottonwood morels get really big and they grow in clusters. And these are ash trees, and my favorite thing, any green ash tree, and if you can tell a green ash tree because it looks like there's moss growing on it, but it's usually It is a little mossy, but it's green in tint. But if it leans out like that on a bluff, you usually find 10 or 15 morels around it. That was one of my favorite trees. Unfortunately, the ash borer is wiping a lot of the ash out. I could go down to several spots that I had, and there's just not very many ash trees left. And that's a young ash morel, and they're live trees. I hunt live ash. Other host trees, apple orchards, pear trees, red oak, white oak, white pine, juniper pine, maples, sycamores. Big sycamores, you find a lot of morels around. If you can get in a younger sycamore forest, they have lower branches when they're little. As they grow, their limbs fall off. That constant deadening and dying of limbs makes them a perfect candidate for symbiosis being interrupted all the time, for morels wanting to fruit occasionally, because there's always some stress in that tree. To me, it's not just to walk in the woods, and I've had people give me, a hard time for carrying. I carry a backpack with all kinds of stuff in it. I'm about, it could happen. You never know when you fall down a hill. I'm 51 years old. I fall down and break my leg. I better have some snacks. Be prepared is what I try to tell you. Just, take some water, spray. I like to use lemongrass and tea tree oil. I feel that the bugs don't like that a lot. GPS or a compass, I don't know. A compass was one of these olden time things. I didn't bring one. They're really easy to use. GPSs, everybody's phone has that. I actually do use a GPS program called Locust Map. I like it because you can track where you went, and then the next day if you go back in the same area, it overlays it with a different color so you can see. So if you got a honey hole, you can kind of go back in there and, like, I found a spot, I'll walk around that spot. Maybe I didn't pick it that day, and then that, a week later when I go back in, I can follow right in and go back in. Hunting with a partner, my wife can tell you, the beauty of having somebody with you is you go to the right, I go to the left. It may look the same, but it may be really good over here as opposed to over there. There's just something going on. Everyone can go out in the woods and find mushrooms. It's not super hard, but to get large numbers, you really have to study drought. I watch things like that. I look at the drought monitor. I see who's been in a drought. I see where the moisture's fallen. I watch like the forest fires. It's the same thing. I spend all winter long looking at maps, studying maps, figuring out which one. And there it's the same thing as being here. You can go out on a forest fire and you can go out and find black morels everywhere. Anyone can do that. But when it comes to the grays or the fuzzyfoot or the blackfoot, you have to know what you're doing. Then it goes back to tree type, like around here. If you're walking around, a bunch of cedar trees looking for blackfoot morels, you're not going to find any out west. Know what you're in. Some conservation areas do spray. You wouldn't think they do, but they do spray. Parks, conservation, cemeteries, orchards. I kind of warn people about orchards. Younger orchards aren't so bad. Older ones, they sprayed a lot of arsenic and lead in them. I'm kind of leery of them. Farmland runoff, the bottom lands. Pesticides, that's the other thing I was warning you about, like the river bottom. When I tell people to start looking is when you get 60-degree daytime temperatures and 40-degree nights. When the ground temperature is above 60, that's when a lot of times you won't find any more morels, or they quit growing. It won't waste its energy trying to grow anymore. That little mushroom up there is called a devil's urn. It's not a black trumpet. A lot of people call me every year in the spring, oh man, I got black trumpets every mushroom season. Before morels, they're everywhere. It's a different mushroom. The devil's urn is a precursor. If you're finding devil's urns, or if you go out and walk in the woods and you're seeing that mushroom, then morels, typically are a week away, or May apples are another one. Those are lilacs, dandelions, another one. False morels. Beefsteak is a false name. I only say that because a lot of people here call those beefsteaks. A beefsteak is an actual edible mushroom that grows on a tree. When they did the toxicology on it, your body converts it into jet fuel and it poisons your liver. I wouldn't recommend anybody eating them. Those are half-free morels. They're edible. We can't sell them to restaurants. We don't sell them to restaurants. You can eat them. Make sure you cook them well. Morels are easy to ID. That's the false morel. It's all hollow and it looks like a brain. A true morel is always detached, cap to stem, and there's nothing inside of it. These are green morels, and you can see how thick these morels are. If you don't know what it is, throw it out. If you don't, if you can't find somebody that can say, hey, that's a morel, or you think that, you don't have a morel, or you think you found an oyster mushroom, or whatever you think it is, If you're not 100% sure, don't eat it, throw it out. If you do eat it, save a piece of it so if you have to go to the hospital, they can figure it out. Harvesting them, I always use, I use a knife, or scissors. It's faster to me. It's cleaner. Collecting them in a basket, I use a 5-gallon bucket with holes drilled in it. It's my favorite method now. Just because I can put a lid on it, I can set out on it. I don't set on ticks, you know, I don't have to set on a log. I recommend the spore bags or any kind of breathable material. Plastic bags are not your friend. Have you ever noticed in the store the button mushrooms that have the plastic over them, how they're brown where the plastic touching them? Mushrooms have to breathe. When you walk around for 2 or 3 hours, your mushrooms start cooking themselves in the bag. They can't breathe and they start sweating and they break down. Dehydration is probably what I do a lot because they sell, that's when we increase the value. Out west, I mean, you would think that when a guy says he goes out and he picks 2,000 pounds, he's rich. They don't pay $30, $40. You know, I've seen Morels go for $140. Out there, you're lucky to get $6, $7 a pound because there's millions and millions and millions of pounds. It's a $1 million business. Dehydrators, there's a lot of them. We recommend below 100 degrees if you're trying to dry mushrooms. Anytime you dry something above 100, you start breaking down the DNA structure. Freezing, there are a few types. If you soak a morel and you try to freeze it, it's not a good thing because you're adding water back to something that was already water. And that's usually when you freeze those mushrooms, they get black or they get soggy. A lot of people, they'll bread them and fry them and par fry them and then freeze them. That works good. We bread ours a lot and then we freeze them on a cookie sheet and then we bring them back out and flour them one more time and put them in a bag and then Ziploc them. And I've got mushrooms that I've kept for a year that I'm getting ready to cook that are just like I picked them yesterday. Canning mushrooms is, people do it, it's kind of an iffy thing. You have to cook morels. I prefer grilling them. If I was gonna make cream of morel soup, I would use dry mushrooms as opposed to fresh morels because when I reconstitute that, I get the flavor. When you dry something, you get all the flavor until the water's gone. When you fry a morel, that's what you're doing. You're basically cooking it and you're rendering the water out and caramelizing it, and that's what makes it taste so good.